Good morning and namaste to all of you. Let's do some prayers before our class. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parbrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Om Bhur Bhavaswa, Tatsavitra Varenayam, Vargo Devasya Dhimahi, Diyo Yo Nah Prachodayat. Asto ma sadgamya, tamso ma jyotirgamya, mrityurma amritam gamya. Om sahna bhavtu, sahna bhunaktu, sahviryam karvavai, tejasvi navadhitamastu ma vidvishavai. Om shanti, shanti, shanti. Om. Let's do that shanti part, which is in the beginning of this Upanishad also. Om Bhadram Karnebhi Shrinduyam Deva Bhadram Pashyem Akshibhi Yajatra Sthirairange Tushturvans Tanubhibi Vyashem Devhitam Yadayu Swastina Indraha Vridshravah Swastina Pushaha Vishvaveda Swastina Takshare Arishtnevi Swastina Brispati Dadhatu. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om. So last week we started this Upanishad, Mandukya Upanishad. And it covered the introduction and the first verse. In the first verse, this Rishi is saying, Om, the word, is all this. Then he says a clear explanation of it is the following. All that is past, present, and future, verily, is Om. That which is beyond the three periods of time is also indeed Om. So if the mind goes somewhere else, he says, maybe there is something else beyond the past, present, and future. He says that is also nothing but Om. So this is what it really means. Om, the word, is all this is. Om iti etad aksharam idam sarvam. So it's very strongly he is telling us this is all Om. And Om means God, Brahman. There's nothing else but God. Now let's look at the second verse today. Sarvam hi etad brahma, ayam atma brahma. So ayam atma chatushpat. All this is verily Brahma. This Atma is a Brahma. He etad Brahm ayam Atma. So this Atma is Brahma. And this Atma has four parts. Chatushpat. Four parts. Or four quarters, you can call it. So in the last mantra, the great Rishi, summarizing his transcendental wisdom, declared that all this is verily Om. So he is continuing that declaration here and giving a discourse to us that all this is Brahma. It's very clear from this that he is repeating that he wants us to understand that Om is Brahma. Om not only indicates the spiritual center in us, in the individuals, but also represents the total spiritual reality behind the delusory concept of the world of polarity. So this Atma also, which we call encased in our bodies, Atma, but outside also. The names, forms constituting the world are mere superimpositions. So those are just superimpositions upon the all-pervading consciousness, which we call Brahman. Tirelessly, we see that these rishis keep on repeating in different verses, different Upanishads, in all the verses also in those Upanishads. They give us a process of detachment from this body, mind, intellect. They keep on guiding us to this spiritual center, which is latent in ourselves. It is there, but we are not familiar with it. So they give us a lot of techniques. Realization of Atma, or the rediscovery of the self. So total realization of the Atma as well as all-pervading divinity. They give us the example of the room space also. So they say that what we consider as the room space is not in any way anything distinct from the total space. We have created these walls, or even in a house, several rooms with different names. We call it a different space. So this space is not limited in any sense at any time. So the same thing holds true for us also. That Atma is part of that Brahma, and it's not limited. Only we think that we are limited. Limited by our body, limited by our senses, or our mind, or the intellect. So the all-pervading reality, eternal, immortal, and infinite, in its delusory identification with the self-erected walls around it. And in our body, we can call the walls of the physical body, walls of our mind, walls of our intellect. And we feel separate personality because of our own delusion. Identifying with these layers of matter, we can gain itself a lot of wisdom, that these are just the layers. We can get rid of the egoism, the vanities, or even consequent stupidities, if we understand that these are the walls we have created. And we got to learn how to break the notion of falsehood. And with the sadhana, we got to walk into the wisdom of pure knowledge. That is the goal of the Upanishads. That's what these masters are trying to teach us. Through the Upanishads, they give a very clear and vivid statement of the truth, if we pay attention to it. These are not the mantras to just recite. This is the truth to live by. So Atma is the reality which, though even undivided and indivisible, has come to manifest itself very clearly within the locus of our body. So in reality, it's not, you cannot divide it. But we think it's divided. And Brahma is the ultimate reality, all-pervading, absolute. unconditioned, and also unborn. Unborn. Okay? It's not that Brahma was born at a certain period of time. Sure, this body was born, but Brahma was always there. So Atma was always there too. Atma is unborn too. So this Atma is Brahma. The individual I is the universal I. This is what he's telling us. This pronoun, this, when we pay attention to it, it has an ocean of significances. When we go into the detail of it, we really understand it properly. When we say this to something, some object, that means it's closer to us. Something close, we say this. Something little away from us, we call it that. Like that wall, but this piece of cloth. Okay, something away is that, something close, nearer to us is this. So if we identify with the intellect or our own body and mind, see, compared to something outside of us, we say this body. But when we compare this body or even the intellect and the mind, it becomes that compared to this Atma. So what is closest to us is our real identity. So entire mass of things indicated by pronoun that is all the objects of this world compared to this, the center of ourselves. So that's why rishis, they said this Atma is Brahma. So this term, this we have to understand. This Atma. So the absolute, this is then the spiritual center in ourselves. And since the spiritual factor is eternal, all pervading, the center in ourselves is the center everywhere. The individual self is the universal self. And that's why this Rishi is saying, this Atma is Brahma. Okay, just think about it. Contemplate on this small, simple looking verse, which we have read many times, heard many times, but contemplate on it. This is a Mahavakya. Mahavakya is a scriptural declaration which has got almost inexhaustible wealth of significances. That's why it's called Mahavakya. And we can meditate on it. That's why last week I was telling you, you got to spend some time meditating on these verses. Because ultimately we shall reach a point from where no more thought can dare arise. All the thoughts, they will lapse into the silence or into the joy of self-realization. It's just like they will merge into it. That kind of a bliss you will feel. Because as long as the thoughts are gurgling, that kind of a deep bliss is not felt. So the divine spark of life in us, experienced as the self, technically called by our Vedic rishis as the Atma, is shown to us by these verses. It's almost like he is directly pointing to us in this very sacred language. So this is the technique adopted in the Vedas to show the infinite by a process of intellectual and logical analysis. Because the rishis understand that we have learned how to use our intellect. We know how to analyze, how to come to the conclusion. So that's why very systematically he is taking us towards it. This is called a discriminative analysis of our experiences with the names and forms. You can understand that wall and this shawl, or that shawl and this body, that body and this mind, that mind and this Atma. So that and this constantly we are used to using those terms, those pronouns. Just like in Rishi Patanjali's sutras, we understood that something we see far away, and we can guess what it is. It's almost like a smoke on the, far away in the hill, and we can infer there must be a fire. Or if we see a cow, we say, yeah, cow will give milk. That's called inference. We haven't seen the milk. We haven't seen the fire, but we saw the smoke. The same way these rishis, they are using this method which is available for us to make understand this reality through our own activities, through our perceptions, because we have a very dynamic personality. It's just like electricity as such cannot be explained or perceived. But if you have to tell somebody, a child or somebody who's not familiar with this technology, we can explain and convey to them through a definite concept of the electrical potency by directing his attention to the manifestation of it. It could be a fan, air coming from the fan, or a light coming from a bulb, manifestations. So that's why these names and forms, through these rishis are trying to teach us what Brahma is. They say all of this is Brahma. All. It's almost like a little child standing with you, on the edge of the ocean, asks you a question. What is ocean? How will you describe? You will say that these waves, this foam, this is ocean. Because you know that little child cannot understand the totality of the ocean, the depth of the ocean. But you will just say that these waves are ocean. That's exactly these rishis are pointing out to us. Because they understand we haven't experienced it yet. But we are ready to experience. And we have to start this from somewhere. The fathers of our ancient culture, they are trying to quench the thirst for knowledge in us. Because if we didn't have this thirst, we wouldn't be sitting down and studying this. We are all seekers. So they are pointing out the absolute truth in and through the various manifestations. Through these manifestations, this reality seems to express itself. When we see that all of a sudden, now spring is coming, we see the buds, we see certain flowers. What is it? Where do they come from? The tree which looks brown, almost dead, and all of a sudden it becomes green. Or some trees we see flowers first and the leaves later on. What is that power which is doing it all? In this Mandukya Upanishad, this great Rishi is explaining to us that Brahma or the Atma is showing the manifestations through all these. He is preparing the students for this discourse. When he says this Atma has 4 quarters, Chatushpad, he's just preparing us actually. Not that the Atma can be divided or Brahma can be divided into any parts. But it means that only 4 fields of activities and the same Atma seems to acquire for itself 4 different aspects. In fact, all the initial 3 devolve themselves into the 4th. He will explain it to us in the future verses. So over here, he's just taking our attention over there. That is Chatushpad. All the Chatushpad, all the 4 parts are nothing other than the Atma. So for the time being, before we get into the detail of it, it is sufficient to understand that quarters are like fractions of something. Okay? So he will give us a further explanation that in our subjective life, we will find that there are 3 planes of consciousness in which we revel daily. The waking, the dream, the deep sleep. But when you add the 4th to it, the Turiya plane of consciousness, when we transcend the previous 3, the entire merges into one. So unless we have experienced the Turiya, we just keep our life in these compartments. But when we merge into the Turiya, we become the whole. In that Atma, there is neither the waker, nor the dreamer, nor the deep sleeper. And it is this idea that has been indicated with the mantra when it says the Atma has 4 quarters. It's almost like if we have a dollar bill and somebody says that there are quarters in there. But when you have a whole bill, you don't see the quarters. You see one. One. So what they are, how they behave, what are their field of activity, all of this is described in this very short Upanishad. Okay, so let me read this again so that you understand the deeper significance of this. all this is verily Brahma. This Atma is Brahma. Okay, I'm sure it's very clear because we have studied this in other Upanishads also, in Bhagavad Gita also. So all this is verily Brahma, all, everything. Because in the previous verse, he said past, present, and future, and even beyond that, if you can imagine that all this is verily Brahma. This Atma is Brahma. This Atma has 4 quarters, Chatushpad. And I just explained it to you in advance, what he is going to be explaining later on, what Chatushpad is. You cannot divide it, but it's just a 4 states of our experiences, because we do experience this waking state every day, dream also, deep sleep also, but we don't, most of us have not experienced the Turiya yet. Once we roll into Turiya, then we'll see that all of this is just one. And from that point of view, this Rishi is telling us, because he has, or he is living in Turiya state. That's why very clearly he can say it all this, matter of fact, that all this is Brahma. It's almost like some of the great gurus of our age, when students ask them, do you see God? They say, yeah, I see God, just like you see this tree. As clearly as that. Because they have reached to that Turiya state. Now let me start the next one. Jagrit sthanoh bahis pragyah sapta ang ātman sthu bhug nara prathamah pada. So now he is telling us the first part, pratham pad, because he is going to go through all 4 paths, Chatushpad. So this is a pratham pad. The first quarter, the pad, is Vaishvanar. So that is the name of it, Vaishvanar. Whose sphere of activity is the waking state? Who is conscious of the external world of objects? Who has 7 limbs and 19 mouths, and who enjoys the gross objects of the world? Okay, so this is like a waking state, Vaishvanar. So the unit of life is experience, and experience consists of 3 main factors. The experiencer, the experiencer, so experiencer and experienced and experiencing, 3 factors. The scientists of the materialistic world, when they take up this kind of a subject, they use the world of objects as their field of inquiry. Okay? But the religions and the philosophy, when they take up the world of the subjects for this inquiry. So it's like, how do we understand? Do we use the matter, or do we use the subjective world? It depends that what your aptitude is. How do you want to really understand? So during their inquiries in the inner world, as a logical sequence, these rishis, they came to recognize the 3 facets of life. Because they are also scientists, but they are scientists of the inner world, the subtler world. So in these three planes of consciousness, they found out, and we know that we are going through it, that in each one of them we act differently, as though we in ourselves are three different entities. So waker in us is different than the dreamer in us, even though we are one entity. Deep sleeper in us is different than the dreamer and the waker. So the Upanishad is trying to give us an exact location, identity, field of activity, and things enjoyed by the waker in us first, in this particular verse. So the waker ego is called in Sanskrit, the language of the rishis, as Vaishvanar. And this Vaishvanar, and this word came from Vishwa. Vaishvanar, Vishwa, is the ego that enjoys the waking state consciousness and is aware of the world of sense objects. He is not only conscious of the objects, but the only enjoyment known to him is in the field of sense objects. So in the waking state, we want to enjoy all the objects. We enjoy forms. We enjoy sounds. We want to taste. We want to smell. We want to touch. And that is all. In the waking state, we are happy with that. We get so absorbed in it. So the waker, while he is awake, cannot have any substantial enjoyments other than these five tiny fields of the objects of the five senses. And there's a limitation how much we can enjoy through these senses. So the Vishwa is described here by this seer as having 7 limbs and 19 mouths. The word mouth used here is in its amplest significance as an instrument of consumption. Mouth. In this sense, we can say ordinarily that we are a five-mouthed being enjoying or consuming the world of objects through the 5 mouths. And what are these 5 mouths? The sense organs. And through the sense organs, we derive out quota of enjoyment in our experiences. So in the mantra, we are told that the waking state ego has 19 mouths. Where did this 19 come from? 5 organs of perception, Jnanendriya, 5 organs of actions, Karmendriya, 5 aspects of our vital breath, prans. You remember that? Prana, pan, saman, vyan, udan. And mind, intellect, ego, and chitta. 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 4. Altogether, 19. So it is through the organs of perception and the organs of action, driven by the 5 aspects of pran and the antekaran, inner instruments of the psychological and the intellectual personalities, that we are able to experience the waking state. And we are all very much familiar with it. Maybe we don't remember the names of it, but we go through it every single day. The minute we wake up, these 19 mouths are working. If any one of them is missing, our experience of the world to that degree will be imperfect. If we cannot see, we cannot hear, if we cannot taste or smell, or if we cannot comprehend, or we cannot remember any one of those 19, makes us imperfect. Well, fully understood the very seemingly obnoxious statement, because in the beginning, when you look at it, it just doesn't look like, gosh, what is he talking about? We have only one mouth, and he says 19 mouths. But when we understand the meaning, we can really see its expressiveness. Upanishads can be studied more profitably when we contemplate and study slowly like this. Try to understand. So that's why he's telling us in the beginning that Atma is the Brahma. The individual ego is the total ego. The limited self is the universal self. It is natural that microcosm is the macrocosm. Okay, so microcosm, which is called Vyashti, is actually the complete Srishti, or Smasti they call it. So in order to prove this, the Upanishad is describing that the waking state ego, meaning the Atma manifesting through the gross body, Vaishvanar, is also has 19 mouths and the 7 limbs. We haven't studied the Chandogya Upanishad. About the 7 limbs, Chandogya Upanishad talks about it in detail. They talk about the Virat. The individual ego is the individual entity living its limited life, Vaishvanar. The total ego, Virat, must be a total structure, including incorporating itself the entire cosmos. So this is a language of these Upanishads. So indicate this cosmic ego, Virat. This is Shastra or Shastric terminology explains of that Vaishvanar itself. It's a fulgent region. It's a head. Sun is its eyes. Air his vital breath. The space, the middle part of the body. The water his kidneys. The earth his feet. And one near fire his mouth. So they talk about the limbs like that. So this is the language of the Upanishads. So the cosmic form of Vaishvanar is called Virat. Virat. And we are all familiar with the description of the Lord's cosmic form. When it was described in Bhagavad Gita, we have all studied Bhagavad Gita several times. Arjuna explained it to us. Then Sanjay did too, because they both were looking at it. Virat. In fact, if you remember, the title of that chapter is Vishwarup Darshan or Virat Rup Darshan. So this Atma is Brahma. We all know that this entire universe is moving in space. It is in this sense that we are told in the very beginning that a pure intellect good at figures and data, very scientific and logical, is not the correct instrument to feel, understand, and live the essence of a spiritual reality of the Upanishads. See, just like eyes can only see, this intellect of ours, or mind of ours, can understand only so much. So this kind of a depth, if we really need to understand, we need to transcend these lower instruments of ours. That's why these students, they went to this guru. They bowed down. They wanted to understand. They could understand the outer world with their mind and intellect equipments, but they wanted to know more. So that's why they went to this guru. They asked these questions. And this rishi started to explain what this all is about. And very clearly he said, this is all. And this Atma is Brahma too. But you are going through the different layers of it, or the different levels of the consciousness. And the very first one he explained, this waking state. And he called it a Vaishnavar. And he said, through these mouths, you live through this. And we can all relate to it. Next week, we will look at the Dvitipad in the verse number 4. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaye Purnameva Vishishyate Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you very much.